Your marriage that once felt warm and playful and romantic has slowly started to feel like a business partnership. I mean, yeah, you're running a household, right? You're raising kids, you're managing bills and juggling calendars. And before you know it, your marriage has turned into this logistics partnership, right? I mean, love is still there technically, but it's buried under this ever growing to-do list, right? Especially when both of you are working outside of the home in addition to raising children. Well, if that sounds familiar to you, you're not alone. Today, we're diving into something that I call marriage burnout, what it looks like, how it happens, and most importantly, how you can course correct before even love feels like one of the things that's on your to-do list. Must show love to my spouse, right? Welcome to the High Ticket Woman podcast. This is the place where we explore some of these deep truths about marriage and relationships and identity and how to live with divine intention, how to bring God into our marriage and into our individual lives. I'm Debbie Caudle, therapist and relationship coach for Christian women and couples who are ready to stop settling and start rebuilding their marriage, right? So let's talk about this. Let's talk about burnout. When we think about burnout, we tend to think about work, I think, first and foremost, but we can feel burned out in a lot of things. We can feel burned out even in our walk with God, right? But especially today, we're going to be talking about burnout in your marriage. Marriage burnout it's not about hating your spouse. It's not even about, we're fighting all the time. It's more that emotional fatigue, right? That settles in when the day to day no longer feels exciting and passionate and romantic. And it feels like, it's mundane and it might feel like drudgery, right? Now the responsibilities take over, the have tos instead of the I want tos. And love, or the expression of love and the intentional ways that we showed up for our partner when we were dating or when we were first married, that becomes lower or even low priority. This is when our conversations are all about, groceries, schedules, the jobs, the stress of work, money, who's picking up the kids, again, the mundane, right? The signs. How do you know when you are suffering from marriage burnout? Well, if you're feeling emotionally disengaged, like is it harder for you now to put down your phone or turn the TV off and have a conversation with your partner? Does that just feel like work? Have you gotten to that point where you resent the interruption of your partner wanting to talk with you, to go for a walk or to go for a drive or to do something to, intentionally communicate? Are you avoiding it? Are you avoiding talking because it feels like work? If you're starting to feel like you're managing a life together, but you're not really sharing a life together, and one of the ways this begins to happen is you stop making time to have shared interests, right? So over time, you're doing your thing and your partner's doing their thing, and you're not talking about it again because that begins to feel like work, right? So there's this slow erosion of connection. It doesn't happen overnight. I think this is what makes it so challenging is that, if you were going from, "Oh, we're so in love and everything's so wonderful and you're the best thing that ever happened to me," and then the next day you something's different, well, you would pay attention, right? If your marriage shifted that quickly, you'd be like, "What? What just happened? This isn't okay. I wanna get back to all that wonderful, heady, you know, all those feelings that was rushing through me just yesterday. I miss that. It doesn't happen that way though, right? So it's it's like that it's like that what's that saying? Death by a thousand cuts, right? Well, the same thing applies in marriage. It's the thousand little disconnects that never get repaired. You or your partner says or does something that's a little stings a little, hurts a little, and you just tuck it away in your heart, and then you go on with your day. But maybe it's a little harder the next time to open up, to say what you really think and feel. You feel just that tiny bit more guarded, and over time, begin to go, "Why bother? I don't feel like they get me now at all." So how does this even happen? How does love turn into logistics? Well, it happens when we get busy, right? Busyness, everybody's busy. There's something about I've lived in other countries before, and other cultures can be very different than our Western society in this way. There's something about busyness that, sure, it makes us efficient, but it can also rob us of intimacy. And, I'm just as guilty of this. Everything is available at our fingertips these days, right? I get frustrated if my computer buffers for 30 seconds, or if my internet is slow and I can't get my phone to load, when I'm searching for something, and then I have to stop and go, "Really, Debbie?" And, Jeff's favorite saying to me when I get frustrated about little small things is, "First world problems, Debbie." And he's right. He's lived truly in some, third world countries, and he knows what he's talking about. And he's right. We can get really hung up on, things aren't moving the way we want them to, but we pay a price for that busyness and that efficiency. It has its place. It's good in many ways, but it's a poor substitute for emotional safety. I've worked with so many couples who tell me, "We don't fight. It's the problem isn't that we're fighting all the time. We just don't we just don't feel anything anymore. Like, I'm not in love with this person anymore." That's burnout. And sometimes burnout can be a trauma response, okay? But you've just learned to push through, one or both of you. You don't wanna rock the boat, you don't wanna make waves, you don't wanna fight, you don't want the conflict, but you're hurting, so you just quietly shut down instead. Or you might just say, "They didn't mean that," or "We're just going through a phase, everybody gets busy." I worked with a woman once who, she said to me multiple times, "I don't know if we're gonna make it." And it wasn't that they fought all the time. It was that they were just slowly drifting apart. And it just got easier to be apart than to make effort to be close. But let me say this, and let me be really, really clear. When your marriage feels like a business and not a bond, that's not just a phase. That's a ginormous waving red flag, right? That's your clue that something is really wrong. It doesn't mean it's the end of your marriage. Marriage burnout isn't the end, but it is a sign, and it is calling you to do something different, right? So what can you do? What course corrective steps can you take if you recognize I'm suffering from marriage burnout? Okay, well, first of all, be honest about what it really is, okay? Don't downplay it. Acknowledge that it's happening. Acknowledge it to yourself and acknowledge it to your partner. The sooner you catch this, the faster you can turn it around. Secondly, you've got to prioritize the relationship over your own individual wants and needs. The kiss of death to any marriage is when you are now focusing on what your needs are and whether they're being met. The moment you start going, "He or she isn't meeting my needs," you're in trouble. Because the question you need to be asking yourself is, what does the relationship need? We all have to make sacrifices at times for the sake of our relationship. You're suffering from marriage burnout when you're no longer prioritizing the relationship and you stepped mentally into this "what about me" place, right? Before you were ever parents or before you were ever co-managers of this household that you're running, you were lovers. You were partners. You were friends. So prioritizing the relationship means reclaiming those roles, okay? Reclaiming that part of who you once were together. The third thing that you can do is literally schedule time to connect. Now, I know that doesn't sound exciting, but that's what's required here. I'm not talking about, you know, meetings to hash out big, big problems. I'm not talking about discussions of who needs to handle what around the house. I'm talking about conversations that nourish the relationship where, yeah, you're holding hands and there's laughter and, the conversation might be mostly lighthearted. It might, in fact, ideally, you're not talking about work or the kids or mundane stuff at all. When you schedule connection like this, it doesn't even have to be heavy conversation about us. It's just an opportunity to move away from the mundane, the everyday stuff and talk about stuff you don't normally talk about, right? But you need to schedule it. And if you can only do 10 or 15 minutes, so be it. But I believe that if you schedule 10 or 15 minutes and you begin to see the benefit of that, you'll find more time because that's how it works. We always prioritize the things that benefit us. Another thing that you can do is bring in a reset. Well, what do I mean by bring in a reset? Well, that might mean counseling, right? It might mean working with your pastor. It might mean going to a marriage retreat over a weekend, or it might mean some sort of couples therapy. And it might mean a structured program like the one I have, my 6-month intensive marriage recovery experience, Marriage in Bloom, right? I created that because I wanna help couples move from the routine back to the romance because, too many marriages end in burnout, and I don't want that to happen. It's burnout thrives in silence, but it's when you start to really show up intentionally and say, "No, I see the handwriting on the wall here, and I don't want this for my marriage. I wanna change this," right? That's when healing really begins to take place. So if your marriage feels stuck in survival mode, right? If the laughter's faded, you feel more like a roommate than a soulmate, well, maybe Marriage in Bloom is for you, okay? Reach out to me. You can learn more by going to my website, debbiecaudle.com. You don't need to have all the answers, right? You just need to be willing to start, right? You need to believe that change can occur. And it's a faith-based journey. So the whole intent of it is to restore emotional connection and rebuild trust and rediscover the joy that you once felt, spending time with each other. Your marriage doesn't need more management. It needs more meaning, right? So this is how you can make love the center of your life again. All right? So that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I so appreciate you showing up every week and listening. It means a lot to me. Please subscribe so you can keep getting, updates for the latest. And I look forward to seeing you next week. And if you know somebody that will benefit from this, please share it with somebody else. Thanks again. I'll see you on next week's episode.